I greet you all. I am a little bit nervous. I want to tell you what is static testing and if everyone can test algorithms. Briefly about myself. I, in an IT company, product manager. Earlier, I delivered a testing course. In more detail about the company I'm working about, Prime company. Our chief task is getting information from any sources. Russian Statistical Office, more than 50 such units. We process the data and provide it to our clients, mainly banks, like security personnel use our data. Briefly, what is ETL process? In more detail, you can learn about it from my previous report at 23rd conference, but I'll reiterate it. ETL process, it's extract, transformation, loading. A process which enables putting data in a convenient way into storage, process data, clean it, validate, scale, and do something further with the data for further algorithms, for further processing, unloading and analysis. A little bit about each stage. Now, stage of loading. We upload data from the storage. We determine the data composition, selection rules. Then data transformation, where testers are involved. Various transformation data algorithms and data quality assurance. Loading data loading into the storage, where data is updated and new data is downloaded. Further, these data are loaded into showcases and to analytical cubes. I think that each one of you faced static testing. First of all, such notions as code review, requirement review. I'll tell you how an algorithm can be tested statically. It is important because we test a specific data set. There is a lot of data, and dynamic testing is impossible because the data is coming in permanently, not removed from the system, is accumulated, and the result depends strongly from the current data set. We conduct static testing using methods of hypothesis, induction, deduction. Briefly, I'll exemplify it. What is deduction? We know, for example, that on Monday it was raining, on Tuesday it was raining, on Wednesday. Going from private to generalities, we can make a conclusion that all the week was rainy. We make a conclusion on the process as a whole. Deduction is a reverse situation. When we know the information about multitude, we can deduce about particularities. Simple example, we know that fish cannot live without water. The next premise, shark is a fish, and the conclusion may be drawn that a shark cannot live without water. This is kind of hypothesis we make in testing. Preliminary preparation for testing. In principle, any preliminary testing is about analysis. Before getting down to testing, we have to analyze systemic and business requirements, source analysis, target database analysis, and data flow scheme analysis. This information will help us to understand that we can get down to testing, the testing access criteria. Source data portion available data at least once written into the database. The data is static, the process has been stopped, like other processes which affect the data. Test design techniques. I would like to focus on the technique equivalence matrix. What it is, first of all, it's working with multitudes. We work with multitudes. We try our multitudes to separate into sub-multitudes in the way that the sum of all sub-multitudes should at least be the same as the multitude, and each sub-multitude could used to build simple requests. This is done to minimize possibility of a mistake on behalf of a tester, because an error made by every novice is that they try to imitate the work of algorithm author, but we have to transform the algorithm a bit from the tester's point of view and try to simplify, streamline them using various evaluation techniques. Every one of you could solve this problem, add the same figures deduced. We can make a conclusion without calculations that the sum will be bigger in the right problem, in the left problem. The principle we build our verification on, we build hypotheses. That said, we can compare with a theorem confirmation. Tools we use. PowerShell scripts, they are enumerated here. I'm not going to dwell on those. The testing techniques. The first thing we do, we prepare a visualization of one essence with all the objects available there. We must see them with our eyes. Further on, based on the data stream for this essence, we look at the algorithm upon analyzing it. For us, we have determined the data stream. We make hypotheses. Then we build, we prepare requests to test our hypotheses. Pointed verification, SQL hypothesis. If everything is okay, we start a request. Our requests can take a long time to go. We try to streamline them, but sometimes we have to launch a request which lasts one whole night. I must make sure. And further result analysis. The analysis scheme is quoted here. There may be, the case that our hypothesis is not correct. If it is correct, three outcomes are possible. Everything is okay, bug in the TEO, T, terms of reference, TOR, bug in software.
So we do even more than the system analytics, but sometimes it comes that some classes of data have to be processed even more, and then we make requirement, bug requirement, and then it's written, or it's a bug call when the developer has to remove the bugs. So what are the algorithms? We have algorithm of upload, download, parsing of data, clearance of data, making direct connection, and what I like most is the reverse link. Sometimes it's very difficult to understand the difference between direct and reverse links. The main ideas for making hypotheses and the main checks which have to be fulfilled, it's survey of replicates, study of consistency of data, study of the quantity of processed data. In some cases it's not very easy to check it, and especially when we talk about big data. When the data is provided to us in a structured file, not every editor can actually open this file, So I know the situations when the file was 8 gigabytes and it cannot be opened actually, and this file had to be assessed, I mean the quantity of data, because sometimes the lines in the files can be shifted, and not every developer can accurately count the number of the lines to understand how much data had to be processed. So we have to also study the extremes. It can be separated into two categories: lengths of fields, minimum and maximum. If it's about data, then it can be blank data or old dates, or dates which are very much ahead in the future. So this is, yeah, we'll tell you more about that later. And also the reference integrity study. If we work with a lot of data, then we can think that some negative scenarios, especially those connected with the format of data and structure of data, and in principle, majority of the errors, they are already included in the source. So that's why we have to study the source. And the principle to make this hypothesis is that, like, well, what will reassure me that the system requirements are fulfilled? And the hypothesis structure is, if a requirement is fulfilled, then the next test condition or hypothesis should be fulfilled. So we have to also look at the historical data. Let's take an example. Lady Ivanova Natalia married and changed her last name. Normal case. What happens in the database when the girl is just born? Then we create record with a key. Snils is the key, and then the data is uploaded to the interface. But then she marries, she changes her last name, the previous entry is closed, and it's like rec effective tool, and then in the interface the entry will be changed, but the interfaces are also different, of course. So now let's look at a very specific example. For example, we are employees of the registry office, and we have to understand how works our last name registry which we use. So the analytics writes the system requirements, clearance, and the selection of data. So here we create the tracing matrix, and for each system requirement we create test hypothesis. For example, we were talking about the gaps. You remember that we have to process the gaps. We don't need leading and end gaps, double gaps. So that's why we create a hypothesis, and we create an SQL query which will allow us to check this hypothesis. For example, in case of a gap, it will be like all entries which are uploaded to interface shouldn't contain leading and end space, shouldn't have two spaces in a row, there should be no blank entries. And I gave you the example of wrong hypothesis, and here it's stated that the entries in the interface don't contain any spaces, but this is a wrong hypothesis. So that's how we make a query which tries to look for a last name with a space. For example, if it finds, then we can see that according to the algorithm it works correctly, but there is an error in the hypothesis. So we can build the matrix of probability, which takes ID of the entry from the database for each particular last name. It selects the relevant entries, which contains only the characters, not the spaces. Then we take the data from the storage, deduct from them the data uploaded to the interface. Everything that is uploaded to the interface is what we need, and what we needed is uploaded to the interface. That's the rule that has to be followed. Then we make obligatory tests, trying to look for replications, integrity, minimum and maximum last name, and then we use automatization of testing. For that, we create supplementary ETL jobs, which I use to check the integrity of data. So we have developed special requirements which have to satisfy SQL queries which we use to check the integrity. So the checks don't have to be dependent on whether jobs been performed or not. So we check more historical data than the current ones, and we have to also limit the portion of data from the top, and the checks have to be very simple and regular, which is very important. So please, if you have any questions, you can use this QR code and you can get detailed information, some scripts, procedures, SQL procedures, some interesting features which will help you to make your tests. So, and if you have questions, you can also ask them now. Good afternoon. Thank you for such an interesting presentation. So, do you have a lot testing ETL processes? Because you have a lot of data, how much time does it take to upload, to test, to process, and what kind of methods do you use for that? Thank you for your question. In our company, we don't have strict rules to load testing. We are just monitoring the logs of our procedures. It's okay if the procedure has been finished in 2 hours, but 4 hours is also okay. If it works longer, then ETL process needs to be revised. So we don't have special tests on ETL processes, load testing on ETL processes. We do a load testing for API testing, web applications, but nothing else. So I also have gifts from our company for the best question. So please ask questions. So are you testing real data or sometimes some personal data are not available to you and you have to use synthetic data? Yeah, it's a good question. As we normally work with open data, all the sources are open, so we work with real data. It allows us to improve the quality of our testing and the quality of data. But some companies that work with ETL processes, and then we have to generate and use synthetic data. Good afternoon. It was a very interesting presentation. At the beginning, you mentioned the quality of data. So who in your company is responsible for that? Analytics, testers, engineers, or you personally? Well, yes, that's me. My task is to provide for high quality of data, but system analytics provides the system requirements and we have to check it. But the quality of data is checked both by system analytic and testers, but very deep immersion into the data, especially in the source data, is done at the stage of testing. Well, and the second question is, do I understand right that you make static testing at BU? You don't have copying of data from the source and testing of ETL at this stage? No, at the carrier stage we do it. It's like pre-prod and we have databases, dump databases, but sometimes we have to use BU, especially if it is a new feature and volume of data is big. So, for example, when we develop a new feature, we test it on BU. If it's an old feature, then we try to keep it there and check it there. Thank you. And the last question. As far as I understand, we need quite deep understanding of SQL, but do you optimize and profile it yourself? Or do you involve architects, developers, you just make a request and yeah. Or, and if the database is not optimal, then you change it. Yeah, we have this optimization process. We have a task for the testers, that they have to go deeper into optimization. But currently, we don't need to have very deep knowledge in SQL queries and optimization, because SQL queries are very complex. And currently, I'm making the query with the same speed as I talk. I can do it very quickly. But optimization is the area of responsibility of the system architect. He's a specialist who is working with a database, and he says we have a rule. According to these rules, the query has to take 10 minutes at the maximum. If it's more than 10 minutes, then we have to coordinate it with the system architect, and he helps us to hash join and uses some loop join, hash join, and other features like that. So I have 2 gifts and I have 2 tickets. So please ask your questions so that I can select the winners. Does anyone want to ask anything else? Okay. If not, then let's give it to the both persons who asked the questions. And please put the smiles on the board. Okay, so